What's up, Bike Club listeners? I am today's host, Jaden Johnson. I'm the content coordinator for Atsap, and me and Antonino had an idea, a cool idea, to try and spice things up for this episode and kind of allow the normal guest of Bike Club podcast the opportunity to be interviewed and be asked questions about the growth of his company, his entrepreneurial journey, and, you know, just change roles a little bit based on being the normal interviewer. So yeah, we're gonna do this. So you feel comfortable being on the other side?
It's a little weird, you know, but it'll be nice, you know, where I don't have to come up with questions. I can just kind of go with the flow. So I'm excited to try this out.
Yes. As you can see, I was joking around with Dylan in the back. I'm gonna be moving a lot, doing weird things. It's just kind of my nature. Don't make fun of me. It's all good. And this is my first interview, so I've coordinated questions for us to ask before, but now I'm asking them. So the first question that I wanted to ask was to start at the beginning of when you started Atsap with your partners and kind of just talk about the conception of the brand, the conception of your offerings, the services. How did that all start? What age, kind of where you were in life? Just go from there.
Absolutely. So I started Atsap back in 2017. So the kind of story about Atsap is it didn't start as a software consulting company. That was not the original intention. When I was in college, I was either 19 or 20. I had come up with this idea for a mobile app called PIMA. It was an acronym that stood for People, Places, Parties in My Area. And the idea was that you would open up this app, you would put your interests in, and it would scrape data from your local area to find things that you were interested in, such as like events, shows, happy hours, things like that. So the idea was that I opened it up. If I had my interest for happy hours and fireworks shows, it would notify me, hey, there's a fireworks show Friday night at, you know, the local stadium.
Yes.
And, you know, we had launched that. I wrote the code myself. We launched it at Pitt, where I went to school. And long story short, we were live for maybe about a year, and we had around 5,000 downloads or so. I mean, it was for like basically being self-funded, you know, marketing ourselves. It was pretty good.
Very.
I was going to get investors involved, and this was right around the 2016 election. So the 2016 election had already happened. So this was like 2017.
Need a whole podcast for that topic.
I know. It's kind of crazy.
What an interesting time to start a company and be in college, I imagine.
Yeah, it was very interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yep.
But as that was starting, there was this whole thing that happened with this analytic firm in Boston called Cambria Analytic.
Oh yeah.
It was like the whole thing was called the Cambria Analytic scandal, where they were basically scraping data from Facebook and finding out or kind of guessing who people would vote on based on their posts.
Actions,
yeah. Which, you know, if you think about it, it's an interesting kind of tech topic. The issue with it, just for the listeners to, you know, who might not understand what the problem with that is that as a developer, if you were using what they called their graph API, in theory, it was that if you had 3 connections on the graph, so meaning 3 nodes on the graph, you could reach everywhere on the graph. So theoretically, if you were friends with 3 people on Facebook, supposedly, is like what I've been told, you could reach everyone on Facebook.
Wow.
And the craziest thing was, you know, I was using that as a developer, that API, to gather event data. So believe it or not, I was able to grab events that were like, you know, you might have posted, we might have not been friends, but you had this, you know, this event for a birthday party, you know, and, you know, maybe it was a public event that you were posting. I was grabbing it. And you could see kind of like, even though it was a public post, you could kind of see the issue with that, where people were like, this is kind of strange. You know, this is not.
You were essentially dipping your toe in the same data pool as them, even though the intentions were not even close to the same.
Exactly.
It was meant to actually serve the user.
Yep.
But once the pool gets infiltrated with poison and toxins, you can't use it anymore.
Exactly.
Wow.
Wow,
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah. And I woke up one morning and the FBI, I believe it was the FBI, they came in and they
wow. Wait, so I've been working with him for a year now for Atsap, and I knew about this company, but I never knew about this. This is crazy. Please continue. Continue.
So we were not like, we didn't have any issues with the FBI, but the FBI, I'm fairly certain, shut down that graph API, or said to Facebook, like, this cannot happen. You have to, you know, kind of reel the reins back a bit. Woke up one morning, all the get data in our app was gone. So long story short, the company failed.
Wow.
Investors kind of panicked because they were like, what are we going to do now? And I was like, well, how about we pivot into, instead of aggregating data, posting data? And they were like, well, now we're competing with Yelp and Eventbrite. Like, we don't want to be another event posting service. The genius behind this, for lack of a better term, was that we would aggregate the data and then display it to people. So long story short, investors backed out. The company failed. Wow. I ended up graduating college and going to get a job at a financial firm writing code. And I got a call one day from a friend of a friend who had a friend that was starting a startup software company. And they're like, hey, we heard your story. Can you help us, kind of get our idea off the ground, develop our software for us? And I was like, you know what do I got to lose? Let me do it. Yeah. So Atsap, kind of reel back into that, was the existing LLC that was the holding company for Pima. Okay. So my original thought was that we would have this holding company, because I had a bunch of different app ideas I wanted to pursue. So the company would own the app, and then we could sell off the apps instead of selling off the company, or raise money on those apps, and then Atsap be the holding company. Well,
so you were looking ahead.
I was. Yeah, I had a lot of goals and aspirations. Wow. And when this whole thing happened, I still had this LLC. I was like, what do I do with it? I kept it around. It's like, we're going to have some other app ideas maybe. But I was like, you know what? Maybe we can be a consulting company. Yeah. And so we pivoted into consulting. We got that first client, and we got another client, which I will say is what was one of our first clients was now one of our largest clients. They have extremely grown, which is an awesome experience.
Amazing.
But so we kind of pivoted into consulting, and with the goal of, we will build apps or software for people while also having internal apps and software that we develop ourselves, and it all be packaged under Atsap. So that's how we kind of got into consulting.
Got you.
People always ask, what does Atsap mean? They think it's like Ant's app, because my name's Antonino. Yep. It's not the case.
No, I know this one.
Atsap is actually pasta spelled backwards.
Yes.
And so people always ask, how did that come out, around how does that relate to software? And the truth is it doesn't.
It's fun. Why is Apple called Apple?
Yeah.
Some of the best names don't have actually anything to do with the services or the product, but it just fits.
Exactly.
And for the viewers watching this, even though he doesn't look very Italian, I may look more Italian, but he's very Italian, and the culture and the family. So pasta definitely is a part of his growing up and a part of his everyday life, as any family function, I'm sure. 100%. You guys are full-blown Italian dishes and everything, so it makes sense to me. But
exactly, and that's honestly like how we got the name, because my uncle, who's one of my business partners, he, we were trying to come up with a name for the holding company, or like the LLC for when we had Pima. And he was like, what are you going to call it? Like, I have no idea. He's like, what's your favorite food? I was like, pasta. He goes, there you go. Flip it around, write it down, send it to the attorney. So that's literally how it happened.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So. It usually starts like that too. So to continue off of this in chronological order, my next question, because that was very interesting. I didn't know. I knew that you had started an app when you were in college, and I knew that it was having some serious momentum, but I didn't understand how it went away or how it ended up failing. And it's a bittersweet reality, but like, I think that, you should still hold your shoulders high, because there was just some uncontrollable variables that were in that situation. Absolutely. Which is crazy. But, what a story though, being tied to the same type of infrastructure that such a large scandal was involved in, even though it was a completely different situation morally, intellectually, you weren't doing the same thing. But like, that is, and when you're in the tech world, things are constantly evolving, especially like I was involved in crypto for a period of time. And with that world, and still for people that are still involved in it from the tech side, it can change at any moment. Like, everything can change at once. Blockchain technology, holographic technology, AI, like if you're involved in those fields or in innovation, it can switch in a second. Absolutely. The government can come in, regulate it, take things out, do this, do that. And you always have to be on your toes.
Right.
So like, that's the real lesson in that situation, is that you could have the user base, the investors, and things could still turn. So you just have to be ready for it. And I didn't know that it was based on that Cambridge Analytica, man. Have you watched the documentary? Can you stomach it?
I have watched the documentary.
Okay.
It is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think the technology is really interesting. It does leave like a kind of a sour taste in my mouth. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I will say you kind of hit the nail on the head there about like kind of learning from that experience. Yeah. Is that one of the biggest lessons I learned is, especially in the tech industry, mm-hmm. someone once told me that information is power, and I will, if I ever go back into having a software that aggregates data, I want to own that data.
Of course.
Because I think that was my biggest mistake is like I was naive. I was young and naive.
Utilizing a third party, not having control of it. You just kind of you built a bridge.
Exactly. And it was like, I opened the room for failure because even if that whole scandal didn't happen, there was nothing stopping Facebook from being like, oh, that's a really good idea. We're just going to do it ourselves. Yeah. And then I don't have that user base. It's like, so for the people out there listening, one of the biggest kind of learning experiences I learned from that is like control your data.
Wow. Yes, absolutely. Data, some call it oil, the new oil. It's very valuable. It's also changing very, very fast. Third-party cookies are going away. So just another example of how these innovative tech trends are constantly ready to shift. And there's other people that are above us that have the power to do that. Mm-hmm. Like, data itself is going to change when cookies go away. That's just natural. You're not going to be able to utilize the same data pools and the same data infrastructure that we once did. So you just have to think about different things. But to pivot off from that, so we got the conception. One of your first clients ended up growing with you, which is also another amazing thing about being a consulting firm is that you can end up betting on a company mm-hmm. at a certain stage. And if you help them, you get to grow together, which is so cool.
Right.
So to go off of that point, how was the first 3 years? Because obviously that company that was one of your first, they weren't paying you a massive amount of money off in the beginning. So, you weren't just fully sustaining off of them. What was it like growing clientele, trying new services, trying services that you had never offered before, making it work, hiring people? Kind of talk about the first 3 years, because I think that's probably the most important time and the reason why you're sitting here right now still.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say business is tough. It is. I always tell people I had the mentality in my head that the hardest thing that I could do, or anyone starting a software tech business, would be building the product. That is the easiest part. The hardest part is actually running the business, getting new customers, and the sales side of things. You can have a great product, you can have a great organization, but if you can't get people in the door, you're toast. Yeah. So one of the hardest things for us was getting new people in the door, because the first question you get as a consulting company is like, well, what's your portfolio? Mm-hmm. So when you have nothing, it's like you're selling people on yourself.
Yep.
And the other issue I ran into was, I'm now 26. At the time I was 21, 22. It's like, what the hell does this kid know? Mm-hmm. Like, and what really my only experiences was my failure with Pima. Mm-hmm. So that's what I used as a selling point. I was like, hey, like I've been in your shoes. So we got a lot of startups mm-hmm. early on. So it was like, okay, like this kid's been in our shoes. He understands what it takes to like start a company, even if it does fail. Mm-hmm. So that was the most challenging part. As we've grown over the years, and we have around like, I think 12 or 15 active clients right now. Mm-hmm. So like now you have a portfolio, plus the clients that we've built products for that were no longer with us. Like we have a portfolio of experience that helps us sell. Yep. But that was one of the most challenging parts. Yeah. The other thing too, one of the other mistakes I made early on in the first 3 years that was challenging was I had this mentality that, oh, we're, a consulting company, we can do everything ourselves. Like I can do everything myself. I'm a developer. My degree was computer science. I can write code. That's not scalable. Especially when you have a company or a business model that is based off of time and materials, mm-hmm. it is not scalable if you cannot grow your team out. Like there's only so much time in the day. I have a life outside of work. I want to, I have friends, I have family I want to, be with. Mm-hmm. So it's not scalable if you're doing everything by yourself. So that's when I had the first big realization I had was you got to try to build out a team. Yeah. Well, building out a team is also tough because you got to find the right people. You have to find the right people, but you have to be able to afford them, or incentivize them to work. Yep. And you have to be creative. One of the things that I started doing to kind of grow a team out which even with like you, it's like, a lot of people have this mentality of when you're hiring people, they're going to work for you and only you. I don't really care about that. I like people like you who are entrepreneurial, who have other aspirations, who, or maybe doing this as a means to an end. I like that because it I think it inspires creativity. So like, you have to be creative, I think, early on when you're starting a business to learn how to hire people and grow a team, because I can't compete with Google or Microsoft, especially, I can't right now in terms of financial reasons, but I back then,
infrastructurally,
it's impossible. So it's like, how do you, attract good talent? Do you offer equity? Do you offer some sort of bonus structure? You have to be creative. So that was another difficult part, because you need in software, I always compare it to construction. These projects are large. It takes a lot of people to build. So how do you afford all those people if the client can't, if you don't have, or how do you find, it's one thing if a client comes and pays for it and then you have everything, but if you're trying to build a steady team where these people, because the other thing was the high turnover rate I learned early on too was tough. You get a project, you hire a developer or two, their salary was covered. But then, it was a 6-month project. After 6 months, they go on and do their own thing. And now, 2 months goes by, you get a new project and you call them because they did a good job. And it's like, oh, I'm working on another project now. And it's like, well, how do you keep people on your bench, in your lineup, on your team more full time?
I'd imagine it was, gaining a steady retainer and having steady portfolio of companies that are constantly needing, your services, which I know now looking at your company that you're doing that.
Exactly.
But where did you start? Because again, that pressure was on you, I'm guessing. I'm assuming you were the face of the business, and it was also your responsibility to go out to business networking groups, go out, show face, pitch yourself as the face of Atsap, and then also pitch all of your employees as well to those people. It was kind of all on your shoulders. How did you start learning, or when did you start really getting a grip on the best way to network appropriately, to be transparent, to be likable, and start really getting people to believe in you and also your team as well?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It took a little bit of time. So I think the most important step, the most important step we took was kind of building a central team before I could go out and start networking and doing more sales. So I had brought on in 2019. So Atsap started in 2017. It was just me for 2 years, 3 years. And then I brought on a friend of mine from college and an uncle of mine as business partners. And they each had their own role. But they had that kind of central role. I knew that if I got a contract, there was other people behind me who were going to help fulfill that. So that was the first step. Because the issue was, it was one, it's really hard for me to sell and network and get new contracts or get new clients if I'm sitting there I have to somehow get this done.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to manage it.
Yeah, you know, so it's it's a different story when you have a team of people that you're confident in. So that was the first, big step. After that, we made a lot of mistakes with running Facebook ads and Google ads and LinkedIn ads, and there's a place for them. But I think the difference was that I learned that when we're selling a service, people aren't paying us, $100 for a product. They're paying us thousands to
So they got to know you. You're not going to be able to convince them in a 10-second ad, 30-second ad, minute ad. It's got to at least, maybe it can act as an introduction.
Exactly.
Right. But
more as
you got to be out there.
Yeah. Like a brand recognition, here's what we do, but they're going to look into you. And so that's why this podcast kind of started. Cause it's okay, if they get to know us, they look us up, they see our website, they see our podcast, understand our story, what we talk about, it builds a rapport. So then we started doing also networking events that we would host, as well as going out to networking events. And that kind of model has helped because it's a long-term game, but you build a reputation. We talk to someone calls in, hey, we saw your ad. Hey, we have a happy hour next month. How about you come by and meet our team? Yep. That builds this rapport and this reputation that's helped us kind of sell and grow. Because I say this all the time, and I tell my team this too. We have a ton of other businesses in Pittsburgh that do exactly what we do. And my uncle's famous line is, it's all about who you know, like, and trust. It is, George W. Bush in his book said that when he was running for president, he told his family that people will vote for me because they're going to want to have a beer with me. And I think that's the same thing in kind of the consulting realm is, the thing that makes us stand out is our ability to kind of connect with our client and build a relationship with our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really think that's the hardest part in the kind of the sales is kind of like, networking and building a reputation. So when you ask the question, like, at what point in time do we kind of find that happy medium? Mm-hmm. It took a long time.
Yeah.
It was a long game, but it slowly kind of starts to snowball. And once you get your name out there, you meet people, and it might not be an initial sell, but like maybe, we've had instances where I've met someone, had lunch with them a couple of times, and like a year and a half later, they call, hey, we have this project. Can you do it? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a long-term game.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge part to kind of emphasize to the viewers, especially if there's entrepreneurs that are listening. There is no way to avoid the lessons on the path. Like you can't quicken that process. You can't speed up that process. You literally have to go through it, and you have to have a realization that most likely the only way that I'm actually going to learn is by trying something and just not working.
Right.
There's no way to even, like, you're listening to podcasts like this because you want to learn, and you will learn from other people, but situations and industries are so niche, like sometimes you have to just go through it in whatever industry that you're in, try things out, try hiring that person and not reading them very well, and they're not right for you. Right. And then, maybe overcommitting for a certain quarter, and then you're just never able to do anything in your personal life because you have to finish the work and the deliverables. That's just a part of the process. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to be okay with that. You have to accept it. You have to accept that that's your reality, and you just have to walk into that with open arms.
Yep.
But like, that's what your story this entire time, before things started probably feeling at least a little bit comfortable, was probably 4 or 5 years of your life, from Absolutely. When you started your first startup in college to a few years into Atsap. And it's probably still not perfect. Like,
no, that's a great point. Cause I think one of the most interesting things for me along my journey is that there were stressful times at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And, I had this mentality in my head that, if we just get to this certain threshold point, it's no longer going to be stressful. Mm-hmm. And like stress, kind of goes away. But like I have new stress now, I have the stress of, we're a team of 12 now. Yeah. So it's like, okay, we have payroll, we have, people's salary, we have full-time employees now that rely on us mm-hmm. to like make a living. Yeah. So it's like, that's a whole new mentality in my head where like, that has changed the risk taking I have to take, because it's no longer just like me getting hurt. It's like, I have people behind me that I have to kind of take care of. Yeah. So as you grow, stress does reside because like, you have people to help out, but new stress comes along because you're like, oh, this is a different type of organism, for lack of a better term. Yeah.
And I think that's the evolution, and that's the realization. You've just learned how to deal with stress better, probably. Yeah. Which that is literally worth it all. Because how you deal with it, you're never going to be able to avoid it. It's how you deal with it that's going to allow you to grow and consistently react better in those stressful situations. So last question. I like the order that we've went in. It's really good. Nice chronological order. Really good lessons in between everything. I wanted to ask basically for like a case study, and what I talked about with Antonino briefly, and I don't know his answer yet. He didn't give it to me. I sent him this about an hour ago. A specific situation. You don't have to name the company and get into the specifics of it, but can you give us an example of a situation where you had deliverables, you had a project that you had to execute in whatever time frame, and it literally looked like there was absolutely no way that it was going to end up working out in your favor? Like everything was just not connecting. Right. Nothing was, but you actually were able to execute and come through for that specific client. And then the lessons that you learned in that specific situation, because I'm sure in between all that you've been talking to us about the growth of Atsap, it was probably somewhere in between there. Mm-hmm. And these were probably some of the lessons that you learned. But I just want to really delve into that, because resilience is a huge thing as an entrepreneur. And I think that's what we're going to get out of this.
Yep, absolutely. That's a great question. And I will say there's one particular project that I wouldn't say necessarily went south, where we were like, oh man, like how are we going to get this done? Mm-hmm. But the one project in particular is one that we had maybe 2 years ago. And it was at the time our largest project, financially speaking, in terms of size and like payment. Oh yeah. And so, in my head, I was like, oh, this is great. We have this large project, it's good money.
Yep.
We're going to, make good money on this.
Mm-hmm.
And this project is one of the reasons why we kind of shifted our sort of pricing and business model, because we got this, it was a fixed price project, and clients love that because it's fixed price. They know, hey, this is what I'm going to spend. It's like buying a house, oh, the house costs, $400,000. I'm going to get a loan for $400,000. I'm going to pay that off, over time. Clients like that. We did this project and we experienced for the first time what people in the industry call scope creep, where we signed this contract, we had this scope of work, listed deliverables that we needed to, develop for. And every time we put a deliverable out, the client wanted to tweak something. Wow. And I remember being there saying like, well, we didn't agree to that, but when they would refer and they would interpret the scope that we agreed upon, the way that like, oh, we thought that was intuitive. And I was like, well, it kind of is, but it wasn't really in writing. So and like the biggest lesson I learned in all this was that software, like construction in a way, like if you build this room and, you decide that, oh, I want the light fixture to be a little bit to the left. People who don't know construction are like, oh, well, yeah, okay, no big deal. Just, shift it over this way. But it's like, actually, there's all this duct work and like lighting and wiring that needs to be moved. And, you got to repatch the wall. Software's the same way. People will say this, oh, well, a common thing, I bring this up because it's a common thing that we hear is like, oh, we can't swipe left to go back. Like, well, you click the back button. Like, oh, we thought you could swipe left. Like, well, that wasn't in the contract, And it's like, oh, it's just an easy thing. Well, it kind of is, but it kind of isn't because there's infrastructure behind that.
So much.
So long story short, the project dragged on a lot longer than we anticipated.
Yeah.
And, basically, as time goes on, it costs me more money because I got to pay people. And so we did not make the profit margin that we wanted to. Yeah. And it kind of hurt our cash flow and, our projections and stuff like that. So that was a hard lesson to learn because, I'm, me pretty well. I'm a pretty laid back guy. So I'm, like, oh, like, what is it, whatever. But it's like, I kind of learned the lesson of like, you have to learn how to be strict on certain
top of it.
Yeah.
You probably ask the client more questions now. You want to specify exactly what they want because as an expert in the industry, I think you made such a good point. I don't think they were trying to play with you in any type of way. I don't think they were trying to take little stabs and really stress out you and your team. They just looked at it from an everyday person's perspective, and a lot of everyday people, as in, construction as well, or real estate, or, finance, you look at it just from the end result, the market. If someone's watching CNBC and they see the market, they see it move, and they may have a couple variables that they know from listening to an analyst on what actually causes that, but they're not ready to actually run a hedge fund, right?
Exactly.
So when it's time to, from the software perspective, a lot of business people, they don't understand what goes into it. They take advantage of it. They enjoy it. They hire people, but they don't quite understand the nuances of it and how much complexity there is.
Exactly.
To just one page on a website or one click on an app. So you have to let them know that. But this time, I think the lesson that you learn probably is you're going to make sure they know, is this exactly what you want? Because if it's not, it could delay us 2 months.
Yep. Yeah. And exactly. And
saying it straight up.
And when it delays, issues arise because like now you're over budget. And when you're over budget, that's when you start to cut corners. And yeah, and the other thing, like along those lines too, is sometimes we've run into issues where not so much on that particular project, but where you plan something out and you say, oh, we can definitely develop this, and you hit a wall where you're like, I don't know, we thought this was maybe feasible, but maybe it's not. And another hard lesson that we learned early on was, how do you portray that picture to a client without looking incompetent? Like, hey, you know what? I know we said that like we would make it do X, Y, and Z, but like we've run into this issue, and we can't do Z, but we can do X and Y, but we can do Z in this this way, and that's a hard discussion to have too.
Yeah, I imagine.
So like I said, we kind of changed our business model into more so of like just here's an estimate of like it's going to take 3 to 6 months to develop this, but like you're just paying hourly or you're paying like a retainer, because then there's no questions. That was the biggest lesson, is like, as a software firm, we lose money when we're not very specific, but software, and, especially in the startup realm, you want them to be creative. So you don't want to, stifle their creativity when they want to make a change. So we found it to be more easier.
Well, and I think that's one good thing to end with this as well. For the audience that doesn't know, there is different lanes that you've curated in the firm. The startup approach to things, which is a creative, clickable prototype, MVP. You guys are curating the beginning stages of it for a company. And then for a more legacy company or a more successful long-term business that's, bringing you on, they're looking at you as like a stand-in CTO essentially. And both sides are, but from their perspective, they have a budget, and instead of bringing on a person full-time, they're paying Atsap.
Right.
So they're much more cut and dry with things. Therefore, you have to be more cut and dry with them.
Exactly.
Because that's just going to be the way that you communicate. So I think you've learned how to meet people where they're at, do your diligence on the company and their processes and the way that they're going to, act towards you, and then kind of, reciprocate that energy.
Absolutely.
And, if you acted the same way towards startup companies, they probably wouldn't enjoy working with you, because it would be anxious and it would be stressful, and you understand that perspective probably even better than the other, because you've built a startup.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
no, that's cool to have different approaches for different clients and different things. That's awesome.
Definitely. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm glad we did this, man.
Yeah, this is great, dude.
I'm glad we did this.
For you guys that don't know Jaden, Jaden's a great dude. He's been with us for about a year. Yeah. He
flew by.
Yeah, he does. He's kind of responsible for booking all the guests, and he's helped really grow our YouTube channel and stuff like that. So
TikTok, short form content, yeah, just creative stuff. Just trying to add. I have a history as an entrepreneur and marketing, and I work for a startup right now on top of Atsap as well. And my role has always been to try and combine business strategies with creative strategies and like collaborate the two things. And I've loved getting to work with Antonino and hear about all these stories and hear new guests and be in the background. But it was cool getting to hear it all in one sitting, which was really nice. And I think the audience will like it too. There's a lot of lessons in this that a lot of people find value from. So it's a good idea.
Yeah, no, great idea on your part. Yeah, I appreciate it. This was fun. Yeah.
Yes. All right, guys. We have, by the time this comes out, we'll probably have an episode already out.
We'll have one more out.
We've had to have a reshoot, which we're scheduling right now, and then we have another person lined up. So we took a break with episodes just because work and things were getting exciting towards the end of summer. But there'll be back to back episodes coming up pretty soon. So hopefully we grow more audience. I think there's a ton of value in this specific podcast, so I'm excited for people to gain value from it.
Me too. Thanks, man.
See you next time.
Yep. Peace.